Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
When I struggled making friends at school, I put all my time online after school. I played games with strangers all the time, but nobody ever communicated with me. Until one day, someone did, and we really connected. All of the red flags that I heard, they weren't there. And he was just a normal guy, living normal life. We would just play the game, and our relationship was completely normal. Our friendship lasted like a little over a year, but the first 4 or 5 months, it was just, I would come home and play games, and that led into the 7th grade. Our friendship kind of took a turn for the worst.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Seven on Sundays podcast, where we have real and raw conversations with young people about what is happening in their lives. I'm your host, Stephanie Boy, sex educator, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Shez Levy, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, our guest is Harrison Haynes. You might have seen him on Good Morning America, but today Harrison has the chance to tell his full story, and it will happen over the next 2 episodes. Harrison is an amazing and articulate young man who was groomed online by a predator at the age of 12. Before I welcome him to the show, I just want to warn you, we do talk about suicide and depression. Harrison, fortunately, is on the other side and has really actually an amazing story surrounding that. And he's doing amazing work today. But many of you will connect to this story. And I know personally, my mama soul hurt hearing this story because I had a child who was bullied and spent so much time alone. And it is so devastating, not only to the family, but to the parents and the whole family that loves that child. So this is a very personal story that I can relate to. I know many of you will relate to, but Harrison has great insights and shares that with us and the wisdom he has for parents about kids and access to technology. So stay tuned through the wrap up because Dr. Shez and I will talk a little bit more about what parents can do to help their child who is in crisis.
Yes, I feel like this interview is a very powerful and important interview. And my mind throughout the whole time that we were talking, I'm envisioning him as a 6th grader, like going through this as a 6th grader. This is where parents and other teens really need support for this kind of stuff because as a 6th grader, I just can't imagine him going through that. One of the other words that stuck with me that he says is there was no place to process this stuff. What he went through alone, very, very alone. So that's why this platform and so many other support platforms that Harrison is working to continue to create and advocate for are very important. So let's listen in to Harrison's story. It's a hard one, but a very important one.
Harrison, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Well, thanks for providing me a space, ladies. The story is really healing for me to share. I was in the 6th grade. I was 12 years old, grew up in a pretty big house with lots of rooms, a lot of space to be alone, which really helped when I was struggling to make friends in the 6th grade. It was a really hard transition for me from the elementary school to the middle school just down the road. It was hard. So when I struggled making friends at school, I put all my time online after school. I played games with strangers all the time, but nobody ever communicated with me until one day someone did, and we really connected. We can call him Adam. So Adam was almost like a mentor figure for me. I didn't feel like I connected with my brothers at the time, and I was 12 and he was 18, 19. And he really helped me understand things about myself that I was struggling with, especially with making friends at the time.
And how did Adam, like as an 18 or 19-year-old, kind of get into your world? Was it all around the gaming first? Is that how that started?
Yeah, so our entire friendship was just on the game. I would come home after school after a hard day. I'd throw on the headset and pull out the Xbox controller, and we would just play Call of Duty or Minecraft or Any game, really. He was my only person that I had friended on the Xbox platform.
Did it seem to you that did it seem to you a little bit odd that he was much older than you, or were you just I'm sure you were just happy to have friends?
Yeah, I at first I thought it was strange, but all of the red flags that I heard, they weren't there. And he was just a normal guy living normal life right after high school. Just seemed like he was with his parents. And I mean, it was normal. I was just happy to have somebody around.
By chance, was this during the lockdown?
No, this wasn't during the lockdown.
It was before.
Yeah.
Okay, got it, and then that led to more isolation. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna let you
Yeah,
continue with your
absolutely.
I'm gonna let you continue with your story.
No. Yeah, that was definitely an arc of my story as well. Yeah, so we would just play the game and our relationship was completely normal. Our friendship lasted like a little over a year, but the first 4 or 5 months, it was just I would come home and play games, and that led into the seventh grade. Our friendship kind of took a turn for the worst. We ended up exchanging iMessage. So I had an iCloud, or maybe it was a phone number at the time. I don't remember. But he had access to my iPod or iPhone that I had at the time. So we would message each other. He was across state lines in Jersey, and I was in Virginia. But he claimed he was in the state of Connecticut, which was a little bit further away. So he would message me while I was at school, and he would say, do you want to play the game today? And that's how it was. And then it wasn't that way. He would start talking about his suicidality or self harm. And he made it very clear that I was the only person in his life that was listening to him. It was very challenging for me when he got my iMessage number and started exchanging information with me. And he was texting me at school, he was texting me at the dinner table. If there was any extracurricular activity, he was texting me then. And for every hour that I wouldn't spend communicating with him, he would reciprocate with pictures or videos or comments about self harm, which further isolated me. I was already struggling to make friends, and that really exacerbated the issue. I felt like as a sixth and seventh grader, I was the adult in every situation, and I was surrounded by kids, which was immensely frustrating. I felt like I had to grow up really fast. And so he made it very clear that I was the only person in his life that he was communicating with. So all of this pressure fell right onto my shoulders. And that's a heavy burden for a 12 or 13-year-old kid to carry. It especially started isolating me when the conversations, especially in suicidality or depression, mental health, they moved into conversations about sexuality. I really liked this girl at school, and I had the biggest crush on her. All the guys in the middle school locker room would always talk about the things that they were doing with their girlfriends or the girls that they were hooking up with or whatever. And I just never felt like that was going to be me. I never felt like I wanted to pursue this girl sexually. I didn't think that that was part of my life. And I brought this concern to him after he opened up the fact that he was bisexual. And so I was like, this guy's got a plethora of knowledge, let's talk about it. It was really hard. He started trying to convince me that I was someone who I wasn't. And he exposed me to pornography. He gave me lots of pornography to choose from. And at 13 years old, I started consuming pornography to self-medicate a broken sense of sexuality. I wasn't attracted to women, and I definitely wasn't attracted to men. And so I was really confused because I thought you had to be attracted to somebody. You were either gay or you were straight. And that's how it was. That was the language we had at the time. So it was really frustrating for me when I started consuming pornography 2 times a day or 3 times a day to start self-medicating the sexuality. And it just dug me in a hole. It just made things horrible for me. The isolation that I felt from my friends got worse. The isolation I felt from my family got even worse, to the point where he was the only person I was communicating with.
Wow. There's so many things that I want to say about what you've already shared, and I'm so grateful. It was actually a question that I had. It was one of my first questions. I wondered how, because I know the progress of pornography. It even if you were to find pornography on your own, it would have made you question your sexuality at some point, because as you escalate or you go into things or you see things and your body feels arousal to them, it makes you question. So I can only imagine how you felt at that time, being that boy who didn't necessarily feel like you had sexually matured to a place where you wanted to do anything with a girl, which is completely and utterly natural and normal, right? You could be a late bloomer, you could be whatever, but when we have pornography exposure to a young child, sexual maturation or curiosity happens earlier. And there's a, I've used this before, but it's like the flower being pulled open instead of opening naturally and developing. So that question was, you literally fed right into somebody who was literally a predator online by saying, I'm curious about this. It gave him an entree to ask you about those things, So I'm so sorry that that happened, because I'm so sure that was absolutely and utterly confusing at 12 years of age.
This is so brave and important for you to share. And I feel like we say that every time, but I feel this in a different way today, because hearing the carrying the emotional burden of somebody's life, right? And that vulnerability that he put on you to create that codependence, that's even a further step in grooming. That's not only am I going to groom you for my own sexual satisfaction, but I'm going to groom you to keep me alive. Like, whew, that's a lot. So I'm just sitting with that for a minute, because that I cannot even imagine at 12 years old, the weight of that as you're trying to be social, like this girl that you like, have friends, do sports, do whatever else you do. So, woo, that's a lot. So I just want to recognize that. And how old are you now, Harrison?
I'm 21.
21. Okay. And how old do you think he really was? Do you know his real age?
I feel like 20,
You think he
19
was
or 20 was
20?
accurate.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just sitting with the fact of you've developed this friendship, this buddy, and then next it turns into, I might not want to live, and I'm even going to self-harm, and you're my lifeline. And I think the kind of person that we can tell that you are is somebody that's not going to just leave them hanging, literally. Unfortunately, like of course, at 12 years old, you might not know boundaries and all those other things, but of course, you're not going to say, "This is too much for me, dude." Like, how can we get you help? All those kind of things. So this is another level of grooming. So I'm processing that, but would love for you to continue with the next. You laid it out really helpful for us to understand and really feel the pace of it.
I would like to go back for a minute and just kind of talk about, I know you do a lot of work in this space of children and predators online. Can you tell us, is there an age that it's more common, or what would you say, how frequently kids are being, I mean, I know with my own kids, they tell me creepy people respond on their Instagram, even when they were in 6th grade, which is like scary. But how common is it for young people to be contacted by older people
Yeah,
online?
I couldn't give you a statistic off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is it's getting younger and younger with every age. So for me, that age range and what it seemed like with my peers as we grew up and we kind of talked about it, it seemed like 13, 14, 15, before everybody had a car, was kind of normal, because that was the age where families felt pressure to give their kids a phone. But now I see people giving their kids phones at 6, 7, 8 years old. And I even had a message recently from a woman from my hometown who saw my publication, and she said, I want you to come talk to this elementary school. Almost all of them have phones. This is their experience. Would you be willing to speak? And that's terrifying, because I was so scared at 12 and 13. I can imagine what kids would feel like at 8 or 9.
But it's normalizing that behavior too, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, in certain ways, like my kids, I mean, my daughter's 17. She's gotten used to just deleting people who say creepy things
Right?
to her online, which is sad. You know what I mean? It's just the normalization of this world gone wild. Even with the shooting in Georgia, like my daughter said to me, "You never experienced shooting when you were in school?" And I was like, "Never, Never. It was we never had that conversation because it never happened. And your generation has to live with this you said you have anxiety. You have to live with low level anxiety. Why? Because creepy people are reaching out to you. There's danger, and I'm not trying to make a world that's crazy, but it is not getting better. It's getting worse. And especially for younger and younger generations. But I just want to say this because I think it's important. The groomer that you spoke of moved you from one platform onto another. That is a huge sign. And we're going to go into all of the signs. But moving from a platform to like a one-on-one communication, I don't know what you would call it. Like, it's not a platform, but like one-on-one kind of communication mode is a problem. It's almost like when they used to say, don't, if somebody like a killer or something takes you from one location to another, that's bad. This is bad. If you're moving from one location in your platform into a phone or instant messaging or DMs, like that's where it gets bad.
I wanted to ask you a question along that line too, of the red flag thing. Did he mention, up until the point where you've told us, had he mentioned, hey, keep this between us, please don't tell anybody, thank you for keeping this our secret, so to speak? Did he use those kind of words?
I don't think he ever used the language like, thanks for
Okay.
keeping it a secret. But I do think as he slowly started exposing me to pornography, I knew that there was consequences for me if I openly shared, because porn was so stigmatized, sex conversations with adults were so tabooed, that the moment I say, hey, there's this internet stranger, and I think he's really in danger, I think he needs help. Because for me, I wanted to see him thrive. I wanted to see him get the help he needed. But I knew that the pornography that he'd been sending me in our text chats, whether that be the videos that he sent me from Pornhub or, other websites, as well as pictures and suggestive photos of himself, I knew that that was going to put me in trouble because I wasn't supposed to be consuming pornography. I knew that pornography was bad. I knew that I didn't know why. I just knew something about it was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Had your parents ever said anything about anything, like talking to people on games or pornography or any of that kind of information?
Yeah, they actually had, my mom told me about this recently, reflecting on this whole story together as a family, that they actually had a community resource officer come over to the house. My mom used to have a wine night with her girlfriends, and that the community resource officer actually gave them a lecture in our house about online safety. And what broke her heart was that I was actually in the next room and I was probably talking to this person. And so I don't know. I remember us having conversations about, don't talk to strangers. If there's the white van, we had a blue van in our community for a while. And so it was like, be really careful. But for our community, it wasn't the stranger in the van at this point. It wasn't the stranger at the playground or after sports practice. It was the call that was coming from our iPhones. And so we were all caught off guard by that.
Do you remember, Harrison, how you felt the first time you saw pornography? Was the first time you saw it when he sent it to you? Had you been exposed before that at all?
I mean, I had seen like sex on TV, but it was just like, oh, that's like sex on TV. But for me,
Right.
the
So it was like very, very
suggestive.
it was suggestive, right?
Yeah. And it was like artistic and beautiful.
The first time you actually saw pornography was through him at 12.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, I ask this just really as a curious aside, because I think I'm writing right now about how, sometimes we see things that are contradictory to our moral compass or to like our own personal tastes. But that is somewhat insignificant and unimportant because arousal has nothing to do with our taste. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do. So I don't know. I think sometimes children see porn and they're horrified by it, and parents think, oh, that's great, they'll never go back. But that's a lot different from how their body responds to what they see. And I'm just wondering if maybe you could sort of speak to that, if that rings true to you.
Yeah, absolutely. There was so much about porn that I felt was wrong. I was someone who, while I was attracted to this girl, I didn't want to participate in sexual activities with her. I wanted to honor her, and I didn't, the way that I had seen that in pornography, it was degrading, it was aggressive, things like hitting and choking and nasty language. It was not beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was not beautiful at all. And I remember seeing that contrast on the TV when I was a kid. Like I saw two people, like they weren't, I didn't see any like nude imagery, but like I saw two people kissing on TV. And then that was like my super thin foundation that got completely destroyed. And so I thought that the peaceful, beautiful lovemaking was like that was completely fake. And so I was just totally encapsulated with this world of pornography because I felt like I had to become this person, and I was the opposite. And so I was like, am I feminine? Like what's going on? Like why don't I want to hit women? Why don't I want to choke them? Why don't I want to be this person? And so like it completely made me throw the baby out with the bathwater as far as masculinity goes.
Do you know how sad that makes me that you had such pure intentions and that there's so many young men and women out there who are the same. They want from my experience with college students, they want relationships. They want that love. They want that experience. But what they see or what they've experienced because the person that they've been with has been indoctrinated through porn and they experience something different and it turns them off entirely. And you thought that the blue pill was true
Yeah.
and that what you saw on television was fake. It's or the red pill, I don't know.
I sometimes describe it as the Santa Claus thing. It's kind of like, I mean, that Santa Claus thing is traumatic because it often comes out sideways through a peer or whatever, and it's that similar thing to the psyche of what I thought was my stable, loving world or truth has been blown out of the water. It's a whole different thing than I thought. Santa Claus and porn are two totally different things. So
Yeah.
not meaning to compare you, Santa, but it's like finding that out and thinking, is everybody lying to me? Like and there's no place to process it. And so that leaves you with such conflicting emotions. And again, when I'm still processing your layer of also being somebody's lifeline at 12 years old, that whole thing is very overwhelming. It's such a huge testament to see you sitting here today, knowing the work that you do and to see your continence, like who you are today, having lived through the unimaginable. Like this is really hard stuff.
Yeah. I completely love what you're saying about there's no space to process it.
No,
Because for me and my family and my community, we didn't have open conversations about pornography. My parents gave me the sex talk at like 10 or 11, and it was super insightful. And when I saw pornography for the first time, I didn't feel like that was a good representation of what my mom had told me. And my parents were super intentional about the way that we had conversations about sex. But when it came to pornography, there was no roadmap for having conversations about it. There was no plan, there was no space. And so falling into isolation, it was really hard to cope. It was like the only way to understand it was to go deeper and explore. And that just wasn't a helpful tool for me.
So I'm going to say something because I have been saying for a long time that I feel exposure to pornography is trauma. I really believe it's a trauma. And the reason I say that is because I was molested as a child. And I talked to a girl one time. This is what made me really realize it. I talked to a girl one time who had also been molested as a child. She was much younger than me. She's now like in her 20s or something. And she talked about how when she found porn, it helped her to contextualize someone touching her body, which she didn't understand. And I totally get that because I would tell people what happened to me all the time, like trying to like understand, maybe somebody else had this same experience and they can help me to understand what happened. If I had the opportunity to get onto porn, I would have been all over trying to understand why did someone want to touch me like that, right? And I think it's the same thing. You see that, and it's a trauma to the brain. And your brain as a young person cannot understand why you're seeing people who supposedly love each other. Like you love your brother, you love your sister, you love your mom and dad. You would never think of choking them. You would never think of hitting them. You would never say demeaning things to them. And yet the person that you're supposed to love the most, you're now seeing in porn, and they're being abused and violently treated by the other person. That is so confusing. That is traumatic because you had this innocent picture of this girl that you liked. And you had all these boys who had probably seen porn long before you who were saying and starting to pick up on the language of porn and what it does and how it makes you feel. And, they're aroused. They can't help it. Their arousal is tied to something that's violent. It's so confusing. I really do think, I mean, whether you want to call it a big trauma or a little trauma, it's traumatic to a young person's brain. When you're already at that age, you would already be confused. I want to just tell you the truth. At that age, you would already be confused about sexuality. I wondered why my boobs didn't grow and everyone else's, like I had all these questions. I didn't have what a lot of girls had. Was there something wrong with me? Did it make me like boys more? Like there's so much confusion at that age anyway. And if parents aren't talking or saying to their children, we need to talk about this porn thing and we need to talk about some of the themes that are in there and how it is completely misrepresenting what healthy relationships look like, it's problematic for that child for a long time.
And I will add on to this, it's definitely trauma. And I would say big T. I don't really like differentiating the big T, little t, because the outcomes are the same anyway, but it's incredibly traumatic with no place to process. And that's the difference. If you fall and, break your arm, that's a physical trauma, but you're having a place to process that a little bit, maybe a lot, if your family is, aware. But with this secretive stuff, there's not a place to process it. And I wondered, did you process it all with your family, the fact that a friend might be in trouble with wanting to hurt himself, or all of it you just kept to yourself and tried to handle it, shoulder it, basically?
Yeah, I tried to take it all on my own. I felt like whether it was intentional or unintentional on his behalf, all of the information that flooded my system, all of the experiences and all of the videos and content of self-harm or everything, it created a weird attachment. And when I felt like I had seen more and known more and had conversations about more, especially in the suicidality or self-harm field, that I was becoming a man. And I was like, I need to step up. Like, I need to be this for this person, even if it means that I'm confused right now, even if it means that I might be in harm's way. And so I knew what the negative side effects of this relationship was. I knew that I didn't need this person in my life anymore. But the way that they communicated, like he needed me. Like he was very adamant that he needed me in his life. So this, like, I don't know, it was such an attachment, and it all fell apart one night. He called me. I was supposed to leave my phone downstairs in the living room, and that was kind of a new rule for my family. So we were experimenting, and I brought my phone up because he was texting me. I heard the buzz go off, so I brought my phone up to my room, and my bedroom was next to my parents' bedroom. So we shared a wall, and he calls me and he's talking about self-harm. He's showing me suggestive videos and pictures of himself. He's showing me bruises and cuts, and there was a mention of a firearm. And so I'm freaking out, and I'm like, this is too much. I don't know how to have this conversation. I don't know what. And so he's demanding me that I show him my body, which I had not done. And I didn't know where the line was. And so I was just like, I can't do this. And so I'm crying, and my parents actually hear me, and they wake up, and they're like, he's talking to somebody on the phone, he's in trouble. And so they bust in, and they're like, I do the 13-year-old thing. I'm just like, oh, I'm sleeping, like. And my mom, she runs her hand through my hair, and she like feels that I have a headphone in, and she's like, give me your phone. She's like, you're done, essentially. And she was really sweet about it. And I processed what that night was like for my parents. So they took my phone. I did not know if he took his life. I went the whole night not knowing, and I barely slept. And they're in the next room, and I can only imagine what they're thinking as they're going through these text messages. Like, there's a picture of his body, of him in his underwear. There's pictures and videos of self-harm content. And so I don't even understand what's possibly running through their heads. So the next morning, they are just beyond confused. They're like, we need to talk. Like, I've never seen my dad so serious. My mom she looked angry, but not at me. And I just couldn't process that. So we had a conversation, and I'm like trying to find 1,000 ways to defend myself. I'm like, but I knew he was in danger. Like, I didn't know what to say. And so they actually had me call him. I FaceTimed him that morning before school, and my parents were there, and they were mad. They were really angry. And he was just eating cereal like nothing happened. And he was just completely unfazed. And I remember that week we ended up communicating with his mother, who through our conversation was the first time that she realized that her son was a sexual predator online.
Wow. I just want to say kudos to your parents. What amazing parents. They may not have had the language or the understanding that they needed to have conversations with you prior to this, but they did all the right things
Absolutely.
once they found out. I mean, what a amazing first step to healing on your journey of healing were
Yeah.
your parents.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. That is quite a story. So what happened after that? Where the mother was there? First of all, there's so many things, but anyway, what happened after that?
Yeah. So my parents contacted my school resource officer. At this point, I'm like, shoot, I'm in trouble. Like, I don't need to be talking to no one. So my parents kept me out of it. They communicated with my school principal and my school resource officer, and they tried to get in contact with the New Jersey police. And it was like a whole deal across state lines. And I had never exposed myself. And so it was like a whole complicated story. Essentially, to protect me, my parents were like, yeah, like, your friend he's put away for a long time, essentially. And so I realized that my parents were trying to protect me when they told me, like, yeah, he's not going to be reachable for a while. And so that was the best tool that they had, and I totally commend them for that. But in my head, I'm like, I just put my only friend in prison. And so
Did you know that at the time that he was being locked up for it? Or
I
did they?
thought, well, so what ended up happening was there was like a weird state line issue, and he was never able to get prosecuted. I had never exposed pictures or videos of myself. He had just been loading my iMessage with porn and self-harm content. And so he had never showed pictures of his own body nude, and so it was just suggestive. So there was no real crime committed, or at least there was weird like jurisdiction limits. And so I don't know what the conversation was, but all I remember is knowing and thinking that he was prosecuted. And so I was completely isolated. My parents did everything they knew how. They took my phone. I was off social media platforms. I was off of the Xbox, that was gone. And I was already having a hard time making friends. And so this completely devastated me. I don't blame them for that. That was the tool that they knew how to keep me safe. But I just didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know how to be me again.
How long had this relationship been going on at the point when he got caught?
Probably about a year and a half, maybe a little less than that.
Okay.
Did they or the resource officers suggest counseling for you? Did they?
I really ended up struggling, especially after that season of isolation with depression. Every tool I had to find my iPhone in my house, I would spend on porn websites. I was really coping with pornography. And I actually ended up exploring my own experiences with self-harm. I, even after he was gone, it was absolutely trauma. I remember really struggling for like 6 months into like the 8th grade with like thoughts of taking my life. I ended up opening up to a couple of friends about what happened, and they misconstrued the information about, you know, I I just wanted to process with somebody. And then the whole school was like talking about it, and I'm still getting bullied, still not making friends. I just didn't know where I could be myself anymore. And I thought about taking my life. I ended up writing a couple of poems to my parents and doing everything I knew how. And I had planned the date of my own suicide. And the night that it came around, I was just thinking about all of the people that were going to be sorry for the way that they treated me. And I thought about him. I was sad for my family and I didn't want to go, but I knew that like, there's no hope. There's no hope for me. So that night, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was going to go into the shower and razor blade myself vertically. And that was really the only methodology that I had accessible to me. We had a household firearm that I knew about, but I couldn't find it that whole night. My dad must have moved it. And so I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. So I'm sitting there at the foot of my bed and I'm thinking like, this is it. Like, I'm not making friends. I don't have any support networks. I don't have any communities. I'm not on a sports team. Like, I'm not even doing well in my classes. So this is it. And I decide like it's all gone. I prayed for the first time, and I asked the universe to show me that I was valuable and that it had a plan for my life. I don't know what happened, but I had fallen asleep, and whether you want to say it was my body protecting me from the threat of suicide that it knew that I was experiencing, or whether it was a divine encounter, I had a vision and a dream that changed my life absolutely forever. I fell asleep that night, and I'm in this giant room with this beautiful painting, and I don't understand what it is. And so there's this giant landscape painting with like this really deep burgundy color all over it, and there's just a sliver of light, and there's me at the bottom. And I'm so small and insignificant on this painting. It's almost funny. And I don't understand what it is. And I'm like, what is this? I didn't grow up in a spiritual family. We didn't have language for that. We didn't go to church. My parents, that just wasn't part of our life. And so I'm asking in my dream, I'm like, what is this painting? And this voice, this like just such a calming voice says, my son, you've planted your seeds in the wrong gardens, and it's time to wake up. So I woke up and I was just like shaking, and I was crying, and I was happy because I knew that something out there cared. Because for this whole arc of my story, it was just the deepest isolation. And then to know that something or somebody saw me, like, absolutely saved my life.
That is an amazing story. I'm literally crying.
Yeah.
I thought that you grew up after our conversation before, I thought you grew up in a spiritual family. That is literally divine intervention. Wow.
Harrison, this is so powerful and so important for all in the audience, for all of us, like having these moments that are part of the human experience when you lose hope is a common human experience. Like we've been there, and there's different levels, and this is a deep level, and you were given such a gift with this dream. And I think we all get those gifts in different ways, these different, God winks, whatever people want to call them. Okay, so we're going to make the decision to stop here and continue next week with the transformational second half of Harrison's story, and he'll bring us up to date to where he is today. We think this is a great kind of stopping point to let us all digest this, and we're really grateful. Thank you, Harrison, for being here and sharing your vulnerability, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.